15 years investigating the nexus between energy and environment, the data point that's leapt out at me most strongly is the fact that since the year 2000, the world has greened by 15% and primarily in semi-arid areas. So let's just walk through that for a second. So 15% is a lot. It's bigger than the entire landmass of the United States. And green is a lot different than brown or dead. And semi-arid means that plants are growing in places that are damn near deserts. And as far as I can tell, that's pretty much the opposite of what the climate apocalypse prognosticated. And more than that, I can't shake the suspicion, and I would love to be corrected on this if you can see somewhere that I'm wrong. Why the hell isn't that good news, especially when it's also allied with the fact that our crops are much more productive as a consequence too? So I could say, hey, look at this. It turns out that there's no more effective way of delivering fertilizer for plants worldwide than to burn fossil fuels.
Yeah, so let's back up on the science for a second first. So plants love CO2, right? We pump CO2 into greenhouses in order to get the plants to grow better. Right now in the atmosphere, the concentration is about 420 parts per million of CO2. We raise it to over 1,000 parts per million in greenhouses to help the plants grow. The CO2 not only lets them grow faster, but it lets them use water more efficiently. They don't have to open up the stomata and lose water as much. Your 15% since 2000, if you'd asked me, I would have said it's more like 40% since the 1980s, all right? So yeah, things are growing better on Earth since 1980, right? Something called the leaf area index has gone up. NASA produces maps that show this. They write press releases that show this, but somehow it's not really present in the media.
Okay, so how come we can't take the stance that carbon dioxide is a net good? Because that's such a walloping statistic. 40% since the 1980s. I mean, I don't know of another set of data that has, well, let's call that scale. Right, that's really something. And green...
That's important, right? And if you look at the agricultural yields and so on, whether it's in the US or India, has been going gangbusters on producing crops. You know, this is certainly one of the benefits, and it's a significant one. That has to be weighed against hypothetical, detrimental effects from global warming. And the net of them is a few percent. Again, it's in the noise. You can't distinguish it. There are other factors about human well-being that are much more important than whether the climate's changing or not. So, you know, if I were to be a little snarky, it's almost a nothing burger. The science says that if you read the reports, but the detrimental effects get hyped up by various players.
The other thing that I've seen the drum being beat about quite assiduously, let's say, in recent years, and maybe I don't know how much you know about this, I don't know enough about it, that's for sure. There are people who are claiming now, and maybe this is because some of the shine has gone off the climate apocalypse, that we're headed for a mass extinction. And I read a couple of computer models the other day that were published saying that there's like a domino effect with regards to mass extinction. And I mean, there are a lot of people, and although there's a lot of greenery now and there's more forest in the Northern Hemisphere, so, you know, those are powerful countervailing proclivities. But do you have any specific knowledge about our effects on the mass extinction front?
Yeah, no, you know, like a senior academic as you and I are, you're reluctant to talk about things you don't know much about, and I'm very careful about that. I don't know about the projections you're talking about, but I'm a priori very suspicious because these are complicated physical, biological systems, and small effects can have a big influence. And so I'm skeptical. If I were to look at those papers, one of the first things I would ask is, how well have you reproduced the past? Because unless you can reproduce the dominant changes that we've seen over the last 100 years, 1,000 years, whatever, I don't have much confidence in your ability to predict.
Well, okay, let's talk about models some more. So one of the things I want to point out to people, and you tell me what you think about this, is that it is perfectly possible to produce pretty damn good computer models that predict the behavior of the stock market in the past. And the stock market's very complex, of course, because it's an index of, well, the sum total of human economic activity plus political activity. So it's a very dynamic system, and it's full of weird feedback loops because as soon as you can predict it, you perturb the system. But in any case, here's the fundamental point. It doesn't appear to me at all that the stock market is more complex than the climate. And if you could produce a model that could predict the climate, then you could produce a model that would predict the stock market. And if you could produce that model, even if you only were right 51% of the time, consistently, you would soon have all the money. And I don't see anybody who's developing these very complex models who has all the money. So I don't think that they can make models that can model the behavior of systems that complex. And so let's talk about models a bit.
So let's talk about models a little bit. Let me back up again and talk about some of the basics. The most used models for the climate system are what are called general circulation models. They cut the atmosphere and the ocean up into cubes, about 100 kilometers on a side, 60 miles on a side, and going up 20 layers in the atmosphere and then 20 layers down in the ocean. And we have a difference to the stock market is we have some underlying physical laws. Laws of conservation of energy, mass, momentum, and so on, that govern how the air, the radiation, both sunlight and heat radiation, water vapor, flow through these boxes. Newton understood those, or Euler, back in the 19th century or even earlier. And we can build such models and use computers. So you wind up with I've ordered 10 million boxes covering the Earth, going up and down in the ocean, the atmosphere. And then you follow the flow of stuff through these boxes every 10 minutes, 10-minute time steps. And you do that for a century or so, and you got some description of what you think is the climate. But there are lots of problems with that. One is that 60 miles on a side is not sufficient to describe the difference in climate between New York and Washington, D.C., or New York and Toronto, for example. So that's one. And so the second is a lot of phenomena happen on much smaller